Everybody. We're going to have a ton of fun today. And heads up, we are planning to do some breakouts for conversation. And I'll explain it a little bit later on. But there's incredible value of all of you being able to talk to each other and process and learn more about these concepts. But as Janessa said, our conversation today is going to be focused around being a change champion. And I'm very excited for this. A little bit about me for those of you I have not had the privilege of meeting. I'm Donna Brighton, and I am a passionate advocate of good change management. So I had the privilege of being a founder of the Global Association for Change Management Professionals, which you can find at acmpglobal.org. I also have a course on LinkedIn Learning about managing organizational change for managers, and I've done a variety of other things in around the topic of change. But I believe change is essential because as a leader, part of your role is creating the vision for the future. And in order to get from where you are to where you're going in the future, be that the strategy, the vision, you must change. And so doing that well, doing that successfully is incredibly important. A couple of things we're going to talk about today. I'm going to do a quick review. If you did not have an opportunity to participate in my last session, I'm going to walk through that content. We're going to talk about how do you define change, the impact of change. I'm going to share the from to framework that'll help you start thinking a little bit differently about successful change. We're going to connect that back to the CalCPA strategy. And then we're going to have a very interesting conversation about questions, connecting questions to your more effective leadership and more successful change. And then I'll share a bunch of resources with you at the end. For those of you who like to have the slides, those will be sent to you post session. So all that you see on the screen will be available to you in a PDF format after the conversation. Now, I do love it when I hear from the audience. So if you're like, oh my gosh, I just watched this great video or read this fabulous book, or here's a really interesting story, or whatever you would like to share with me, please type that in the chat because it makes it so much more fun when you participate along with me. I like to tell people that collectively you have far more experience than I do, just as myself. So let's benefit from the audience brilliance, genius, wisdom that we have here today. So please feel free to type in the chat and share information, insights, etc. So one other request, Janessa already mentioned that if you are able to, I understand not everyone can, but if you are able to, we would love for you to smile and show your face. All right, you guys ready for a review? Thumbs up. Yes. All right. I love it. Good to see your faces. First of all, this is one of the most important concepts to understand when it comes to change because people tend to mix these up. Change is the external, transition is the internal. Change is what all of you as leaders make a decision to do. We're going to implement a new process. We're going to change our organizational structure. Those are external things. And the reality is you can change as much as you want. But in order for that change to be successful, you need the transition, the internal parts of your team, your people to support that change. So there's a difference between change and transition. Again, change is the external, transition is the internal, and it's the process that people go through, which we talked about the fact that in any change, whether it's one that you've chosen or one that's happening to you, when change occurs, you have to let go of whatever was. You go through this messy middle, the transition phase, when you're figuring it out for yourself, and then you shift into that new beginning. Everyone goes through the process, but the process is different because we're all different as human beings. So this is what makes it challenging as a leader of change because everyone's at different places in that change process. So again, what occurs is whenever a change happens, we have to let go of something participate in that messy middle, that transition, and then move into the future state. So, we like to talk about the fact that people resist change. And we covered a couple of these points during our last conversation. First of all, was the FUD factor. Not sure if you've ever heard of this, but FUD stands for fear, uncertainty, and doubt. And in times of change, there's a lot of FUD going on. So as a leader, you need to be aware of the reality that this can get in the way and create resistance. Another reason that people often push back or appear to resist change is they just don't understand it. They're missing awareness about some key elements of it. They don't know why it matters, why it's happening, what is really the change that's going on. So it can just be a lack of clarity. And then another reason is people are always concerned during times of change about how it impacts me. So there may be a concern about my role, my importance, my significance, whatever's happening in my world. And as a result, I'm not really happy about it. So I'm going to resist. Now, those are just 3 reasons. There are lots more, but those are the couple that we talked about during our last session. And all of you out there, as you're listening in, if you have any other reasons that people resist change, things that you've encountered, go ahead and type those into the chat. I'd love to hear from you. So once we talked about the reasons that people resist change, we walked through 4 roadblocks that often occur during times of change. We talked about the reality that people have a limited amount of capacity to absorb change. And this is a really fun subject, which I won't re-explain now, but if you are interested, go ahead and check out that last session that we did together. But capacity, the ability to absorb and make it through the transition process, is one of the reasons that there can be a roadblock for change. Capability is another reason. People just don't know how they need to change. And so that is another roadblock that can occur. And it's often why training and communication are elements of a change management plan. They aren't change management, but they can help people learn more and build their capability. Another roadblock we spoke about was culture. And culture are the beliefs that drive the behaviors that lead to the results or outcomes. And often when there is a change, there are new results you want to achieve, which means new behaviors need to occur. That's the change. However, those underlying beliefs that are supporting or driving those behaviors can help or hinder the change. And that's what we're talking about in terms of roadblocks. The culture can get in the way of successful change. And then the last thing we talked about in terms of a roadblock was leadership. Now, there's a fabulous organization called ProSci, and they have been doing a research study every other year for over 2 decades. And consistently, in every single study they have done, the number one reason for success or failure in any change is, you guessed it, it's leadership. So that is another roadblock that can get in the way of successful change, and that's leadership. David, I love this. You said another reason for change resistance is some people are generally lazy, and that inhibits embracing change. I would reframe that slightly in that we're all more comfortable in status quo, meaning whatever is happening, that's actually the biggest enemy to successful change is I'm just comfortable where I'm at. So thanks for sharing that. We also spoke in our last session about making the case for change. And this is important because I don't know about you, but when I went to school, I never learned how to effectively communicate change that's going on. And I am kind of walked you through these 5 elements that are essential when you are sharing any change. And the reason for that is exactly what I just mentioned in the context of David's comment, that most people are pretty comfortable with how things are. And status quo is the enemy of successful change. So you have to start off by explaining why you can't keep doing what you've been doing. So you need to explain why the present state, why the current state is not going to keep working for you. When you start there, that helps dismiss any preconceived notion that if I just hold on long enough, this too shall pass. So these are the elements, again, in making the case for change, explaining why we can't keep doing what we've been doing, what exactly is the change, what's the impact of the change, and we're going to talk some more about that today. Acknowledge that it won't be easy as you're going through this change. And that's really important. I've worked with leaders who they get so excited about whatever the new change is. They just talk about it like it's going to be so easy, so exciting. And you get a lot of cynicism when people are like, no, actually, this is going to be challenging. So acknowledge that. It doesn't mean you can't do it, but acknowledge the challenge of the change. And then, of course, the last piece is always the what's in it for me? How am I being impacted? And a tip for all of you as you communicate change, if you don't know the answer to the question, you still want to acknowledge it. Just let people know that you don't have an answer for them at this time, and you'll let them know on such and such a date. Give them some certainty about when you'll follow up and give them more insight on that change. So those are the elements that we walked through during our last conversation. And hopefully that gave you guys a good foundation as we jump into our conversation today. And what I'd like to talk about is actually defining that change, because it's really interesting as I've spoken with so many project managers who tell me, oh yeah, we do change management. We've got some elements of training and we're communicating, so we're all set. Yay, that's great, and it's insufficient. So let's talk some about project management. I think it's a fantastic discipline, have been very involved with the Project Management Institute for decades and love what they do. However, projects often are focused on the task of getting the implementation done. However, when you implement the new thing, whatever it is, the new process, the new system, the new strategy, the implementation is the point at which the change actually begins. And in order for that implementation to be successful, for you to realize the benefits of that change, you need the people to buy in. So, because successful projects involve people, this is just a reality, and I'm sure you can all relate to this, is that whenever you involve people, it's never a straight line, right? So have you encountered that? You have your project plan, everything's laid out, you've got the tasks listed, you know exactly what's going to happen when, and then things happen. So this is the reality, and we're going to talk about the difference and why it's so important to reflect on the change impact of whatever project you are doing. And I like to think about this, that you're working on the project when you're doing project management, and you're working within the process, the system, the organizational structure, whatever the change is. Whenever you're doing change management, you're working within the context of that change. So the reason we're going to look at change impact is because as a leader, it's essential for you to understand how to help people move through their transition process by being clear on the impact of the change on each of them. And it's really interesting because if you can think about some of the changes that are going on, you might talk about, oh, yes, it could be a change to the tax code. It could be a new form, a new system that is being implemented. Lots of new things are, in fact, maybe changing, right? The external part, but the internal part, the impact of that change isn't the system or process or strategy. The change impact is the process internally that's necessary in order to be successful. So you can see, as I compare and contrast on the slide, I have got things like the time that I need to learn the new system, to learn the new process, or to understand how to work with the new people that I've just learned are my teammates. It's an opportunity to balance the old, right? Because I'm letting go of whether it's a system or a process or a team or a leader, whatever the change is, I need to let that go and start working in the new context. And it's that internal adjustment process, that transition. So that's really the change impact. And as a leader, my question to you is, how do you ensure that you're thinking about the impact of the change on the people so that you can give them the adequate support, time, resources, et cetera, in order to be successful in the change that you're leading? So that's always the opportunity as a leader, is when you have defined a change, again, system, process, whatever it might be, pause and consider, who are the people being impacted by this change and what is the impact? So I don't know if any of you have changes going on. I'd love for you to type in the chat. Tell me about some of the changes that you're anticipating in the coming year. So 2024 is just around the corner. I mean, we're talking like 25 days from now, we're going to be moving into 2024. What are some of the changes that you're anticipating coming up? Because as you think about change, it's not just about getting the change. There are some other elements that I mentioned earlier, and these are those culture pieces, because the beliefs, the underlying beliefs, which is the culture that exists in an organization, I believe I need to show up this way, that results in behaviors. And the behaviors lead to outcomes or results. So when you want a new result, for example, we're upgrading our system and it's going to be faster, better, whatever the result is, you need to think about what are the behaviors and what are the underlying beliefs. So that's the people part of the change impact. So any changes that you're going through in the coming year? No changes? Natalie, new hires. Yes, that's great. So the change for people joining the organization, yes, they have a new job, but that's beautiful that you've recognized they're going to need time to understand what's expected of them, right? Behavior wise, and what do they need to understand about the organization so they can be successful? So that's beautiful. Melody, new supervisor. Okay, super. So that's again, people change, right? And just because it's an exciting new opportunity for someone's joining the organization, thinking about how do I help them understand the organization in a way that helps them get results as quickly as possible. So love that. And Jason said, coordinating with your new India office. Yes, there's a lot going on there, right? Like how, like those are all the what's of the project, but also the people, engaging them and understanding how do we work successfully together. So that's a really good conversation for all of you who are bringing new people into your organization, having that conversation about how to be successful together. All right, Rob, yes. So some changes in the staff, some client changes, streamlining business, all those things, changes, right? And the question is evaluating, pausing, thinking about what is the impact of that change and how do I ensure that it's successful, that I realize the benefits or the results of doing that well. So I'd like to give you a little tool that I think is incredibly helpful once you've paused to consider what's the impact of the change, right? So all of you have mentioned excellent examples of a change, right? Somebody's joining the organization, so you're onboarding. The change is they started with you, but the question is, what do they need to start doing? What are the behaviors? And maybe for new people, that's not necessarily leaving behaviors behind, but it could be. I mean, how many times have you had new people join the organization? They're like, at my last organization, we used to do this, this, and this. Okay, great. But here's why we do it this way, right? So the tool that I'd like to share with you is once you've identified what is the change, What is the impact of that change? And kind of like, what does success look like in achieving that change and realizing the benefits or the results of that change? You want to pause and think, what do I need to stop doing? What do I need to start doing? And I'll give you an example. This was a larger project. This was actually, it was a merger and acquisition that I worked on in terms of integrating the cultures. So again, we're talking specifically about how you need to consider the underlying beliefs and behaviors that lead to successful change. So in this case, as you can imagine, whenever there's two organizations that are merging together, there's, organization A and organization B, and they each have their ways of doing things. And there can be a little bit of conflict that occurs as a result. I call those culture flashpoints. So as the new leadership team was working together, we actually worked on what does successful change look like, right, in this new entity, this integration, and what are the behaviors we need to stop doing, and what do we need to start doing? What do we need to move from, and what do we need to move to? So they came up with this reality that instead of it's us versus them, company A versus company B, our way, your way, right? That they needed instead to think about one team, one plan. So they came up with 3 behaviors they were going to focus on stopping, and 3 behaviors they were going to focus on doing more of that would enable them to achieve those results or outcomes, to make them feel part of the bigger organization. And you can see those are in the lower right-hand corner. That was an example of a specific client project where they paused to think about what are the behavior changes that need to occur in order to create a successful outcome. So I like to move on and talk specifically about the Cal CPA strategy. So for those of you who maybe are not familiar with it, but hopefully you all are, over the last year, and I'm talking 2022 in through 2023, the members contributed and helped build the new strategy for Cal CPA. And so I'm not going to walk through all the specifics of it, but there were so many input points throughout the journey in the creation of the Cal CPA strategy. And the output of that strategic process was there were 4 main areas, 4 main focus places for Cal CPA. Shift the identity, transform the career experience, create super fans, and operate with excellence. And here's a little bit more detail about each of those. So these are the strategic outcomes that Cal CPA has committed to in the coming years. And all of you as leaders in your chapters are part of this exciting new future. And I bring this up because we want to connect what we've just been talking about in terms of change and the change impact and the underlying beliefs and behaviors back to this strategy. Because anytime that you identify and come up with a new strategy, that results in change. And so this is an opportunity for all of you to pause and think about that change. So as we considered those 4 strategic outcomes for Cal CPA, shifting the identity around the profession. This is raising the awareness, redefining the image of the CPA profession and showcasing the accounting and finance profession. Transforming the career experience. So really leading in the transformation of that career experience for all accounting and finance professionals. Then creating super fans so that everyone who interacts with Cal CPA moves from just being aware of the organization to being a super fan. And finally, operating with excellence. So I share this with you because in order for those things to happen, those results to occur, we're going to need to have some new and different behaviors supported by some new and different beliefs. So
Donna,
we're going to have the opportunity for all of you as leaders in the chapters to have a conversation. And as we do this next breakout, here's my 3 objectives for you in this conversation. I want to give you an opportunity to process what you've learned, right? Just have some fun conversation about, well, that was interesting, or I'm not familiar with that. Also that everybody has an opportunity to participate. So you hear from the brilliance and the genius of everyone on this call. And finally, the intention of these breakouts is so that you meet somebody new. So you've had the opportunity to work with many of your colleagues in your chapter. We really want to give you a chance to meet somebody who's in a different location, hopefully, that you can learn and grow from and build relationships. So, with that in mind, I'm going to ask whenever we set you up for a breakout that you start that with introductions. Tell people your name, where you're from, how long you've been involved with Cal CPA. So just get to know each other first. And then you have a discussion question. So here's the context I'm setting up with you. One of the strategic outcomes that we just walked through was creating super fans. And what you're going to have a conversation in your group about is, what are the beliefs and the behaviors that need to change within a chapter in order to move from this to this? So these are my examples. Maybe this is real, maybe it's not, but I'm just saying, as an example, to create a super fan, maybe you need to move from a mindset or belief that what we've always done, it's just fine, it's good enough. And you move from that to, hey, we're bold, we're brave, we're committed to excellence. It's a new day, so let's try something new. So that would be an example of the mindset shift. Another example, and again, I'm just trying to give you some context about answering the question, is the assumption or habit of, hey, it's 2024, let's set up our events calendar. Yay. Right? That's great. But if we're thinking about the outcome of creating a super fan, instead of that, maybe we get curious and we say, how do we create or help people experience something different and make them super fans of Cal CPA rather than just set up an event calendar? So those are some examples that I want you to have a conversation around, how to shift the beliefs and behaviors within the chapter so that you're creating super fans. So that's the conversation. And when you come back, I'm going to ask you to either go live or type in the chat and share the beliefs and behaviors that need to change within a chapter to move from an event mindset to a super fan mindset. So it is 10:32. I'm going to give you about 7 minutes to do introductions and then have a discussion about the behaviors and beliefs that need to change in order to support the strategy. Fantastic. Well, I would love to hear if you want to go verbal, feel free to take yourself off mute and share, or type in the chat beliefs and behaviors that need to change.
So I can copy and paste this. So basically we came up with Melody and I came up with the left side of the matrix,
Okay.
but we didn't really have time to fill out the right side yet.
Oh,
We were trying to get to know each other a little bit
great.
before we got into this, and so it was kind of difficult to to get through both sides of the matrix and do that. So that's all.
Okay. So note to self, next time, give you guys more time.
Yeah. And then we were also placed in a breakout room with a bot. So yeah,
Okay.
but that's fine. It's not a big deal.
All right. Good to know. Thanks for that heads up. All right. So thanks for sharing. And so these are the some things to think about in terms of what needs to change within the chapter to move from an event mindset to a super fan mindset. So great. Thanks for sharing. Anybody else have some points they want to share in your conversation? Andre, I think I see you speaking. Yes? No? Okay. Anybody else want to share?
I guess I'll just share a little bit about what I guess the matrix on the left side, what I meant by all this, or what we meant by all this. So basically just the common language description that I hear a lot from a lot of the students that I'm talking about. So I
Mhm.
go out to high schools, and I'm trying to put together like a high school outreach program. A lot
Mhm.
of them, they're like, that sounds so boring. The really long hours, and they're like, well, why wouldn't I just become an engineer or something like
Mhm.
that? Um, and so that's why I go towards those common language descriptors.
Okay.
And then specific behaviors, when I see that that description come into reality in the workplace, you know, a lot of the not the people coming right out of college, they're very gung ho
Mhm.
still, but
Mhm.
the people that have like 2 or 3 years of experience, and they're kind of just chugging along to try and get to industry or to get out,
Mhm.
they start developing low motivation and energy. They don't have a lot of time for other pursuits,
Mhm.
and that also prevents becoming a super fan of the profession and interacting with Cal CPA. But then
Yeah.
also lack of awareness of Cal CPA, I think,
Mhm.
especially in the mid tier and upwards firms.
Mhm.
Um, they don't need to purchase CPE credits, so it's because they've got their internal systems, right? But
Mhm.
I think what's really beneficial about Cal CPA at those firms, and that they're missing out on, is the networking capabilities. I mean,
Mhm.
they have the ability to network with bankers, attorneys, other CPAs from other firms, so that they don't feel like they're in such a bubble.
Mhm.
It's like, oh, if I work at EY, this is how it is everywhere,
Yeah.
and I need to stay here or something.
Yes.
There's so many people that they could be talking to and expanding their horizons, but they get, uh, again, it comes back to how many hours they're working, and you get
Mhm.
stuck in your own head. So
Mhm.
that's what I went to for the left side.
That's
So I'd
great.
like some
Thanks.
feedback on the right side for sure.
Yeah. So thanks, Kurt. And this is a really great starting point, like you said, because you needed some more time to get into the two. But it also gives an opportunity as each of you are thinking about how to program and create opportunities in the coming year. If you're like, all right, low motivation and energy or lack of time. Well, instead of, learning about the latest development in the accounting profession, what if there was some learning around helping people manage their energy and their time, as an example, right? And and here's what's really cool about accounting, and really feature that.
Right. And you know, it, those events are awesome. I think that the
Hmm.
CPE that Cal CPA does
Hmm.
provide is still very valuable. It's just
Yeah.
valuable to a different audience. But
Hmm.
I think that there's definitely, we can lean more definitely on, for instance, the axe throwing events, the hiking events, the all of those events where we get together and we do something together. And pitching I've been pitching that to my colleagues at GT, just trying to get them out, because I
Hmm.
find that they stay in that office
Hmm.
even on off season. They stay in that
Wow.
office past like 8 p.m., and I'm like, why are you still here? Like,
Yeah.
your
Yeah.
your families are waiting for you.
Right. Right.
The bars at the very least.
Yes. So
Like, there's a
Gail, you
life
asked a
outside of
you
this.
asked a great question about uh you know like, are we saying that we're leaving events behind? I'm not saying that we leave events behind, but I'm trying to challenge everyone to think about, instead of thinking events are a construct.
Hmm.
So you're all very creative and clever. How can you think about things differently? And Kurt was just talking about, there's hiking opportunities in different ways so that people connect and learn about the awesome and amazing human beings that are part of Cal CPA. So again, I'm not saying that you should never do events. I'm simply saying, instead of making that the consistent thing, is there different ways of ensuring or encouraging this to happen? So great conversation. Thank you, Gail and Natalie and Tommy, for sharing some thoughts here in the chat. And thanks, Kurt, for sharing your thoughts as well, verbally. So I want to connect, and we didn't answer the question. My goal was just to provoke you into some little bit different thinking. Again, what do you need to stop doing and what do you need to start doing in order to create super fans? And one of the best ways that you can do that is maybe ask some questions of super fans and say, hey, what's happening? What do you enjoy doing? What do you love about whatever it is that's creating your super fandom? But what I want to do now is your role in leading change, because for each of you on this call, no matter what your position in chapters and in the organization, each of you are part of Cal CPA. And there are three major activities, if you would, that are essential in leading change. So first of all is participating and being part of the change. Second is communicating. And we spoke about the making the case for change, being able to talk to that. And then the last piece is building a coalition, getting everyone else excited about the change. So when it comes to Cal CPA, I'm specifically talking about leading the change and helping implement the strategy, but also being the representative for the Cal CPA of the future and why to be so excited. So a couple of reminders as leaders, and we were having a chat in my group about the challenge that you can have, because sometimes, depending upon your role in an organization, you weren't the one who decided on the change, but as a leader, you're always responsible for supporting and being a champion of the change. And so that can be somewhat challenging, but that is the reality of change. And the opportunity you have in being a leader at Cal CPA is supporting and being the change that we're looking for. Because back to the beliefs drive behaviors, lead to results, you need to think about the underlying beliefs and be different, which leads to doing things different, those behaviors, and finally sharing it. So I wanted to talk for a moment because I work with lots of different boards and leaders and executives, and there's a really interesting outcome when somebody comes to you and says, I have a question. And then they ask the question, and as I have here on the slide, your worst nightmare happens. You have no idea how to answer that question. Has anybody had that experience? Somebody asks you something and you have no idea how to respond?
Almost
Well,
every day.
almost every day. Well, I would like to challenge the belief that as a leader, you always need to know the answer to everything. So I'm going to suggest that a false belief is that as a leader, whatever your role is in the organization, that you must know and understand absolutely everything that's going on, and not only know it to the nth level of degree, but be prepared to explain it clearly, completely, and defend whatever a member says, whatever question they have. So I'm going to suggest that's actually a false belief. And what I put here was probably some things that drive the belief that a leader needs to know the answer to everything. So for many people, they feel if I don't know the answer, I'm going to look stupid. And nobody likes to look stupid. Or if somebody asks me a question, and as a leader within the organization, member of the board, member of the chapter, if I don't know the answer, they're not going to think very highly of me. They're going to be like, wait, I thought you were the leader. What's going on? How come you don't know? Or just the belief that I should know the answer. So let's challenge that. Back to a reminder on transition. If you look here in the middle, part of a change process is asking questions. And in that messy middle, that time of uncertainty, questions are really good. Questions mean that people are wrestling with the change, that they're curious about the change, that they want to learn about the change, that they're not sure about the change. So I would like to reframe your thinking about questions during times of change. That as a leader, you don't need to have all the answers. That as a leader, you want to be excited when you hear people asking questions. and that your opportunity is to listen and encourage them in their question asking. So here's the from to I'm going to suggest for all of you. So I'd like to say you're going to move from believing that not having an answer means that you're stupid, that you're not doing your job, that it's just means you're a bad leader if you don't know the answer. So we're going to let that go. That's what we're moving from. And then what we're going to move to, my suggestion for you in your change transition process is that questions are a normal and healthy part of change. It's part of the transition. And when people ask me questions, it means they're thinking about the change. They're exploring the change. They want to know more. This is a good thing. And finally, even if I don't have answers, when people ask me questions, my role is not to be the know-it-all. My role when people ask me questions is to be a really good listener. And if I listen and ask them some questions to help clarify their thinking and move through that transition process, that's enough. I don't have to have the answer. So that's what I'm going to suggest for all of you as you are from to in making that transition. I want to just check in with all of you. So Tommy asked about defining a superfan. Absolutely. There's a fantastic slide. We can include that in the materials we follow up with everyone and share with you that definition of superfan. And yeah, so there was a question, shouldn't we be able to direct to the right resource or person? Absolutely. I'm not saying that if you don't know the answer that you just say, oh, I don't know. You as a leader have a responsibility to ensure that the person gets the right answer. What I'm trying to challenge is the belief that you need to know the answer on the spot and have a complete understanding of what's going on. Because the hard thing is that during times of change, there's lots of change, meaning it's an answer, but sometimes that answer evolves. And so we need to be able to do exactly what you said here. And I think it's Raju that we want to be able to direct people to the right resource or the right person and make sure they're able to get their questions answered. So yes, I'm not suggesting that that's great. You have a question. Oh, well, I'm not going to answer it. It's simply saying that you don't need to have the answer on the spot. So that was my recommendation to all of you. So curious for all of you on the call, why do questions matter? So when you think about questions, are questions there to frustrate you? Are questions there to challenge you? Why are questions important? And hopefully from the conversation that we just had, you might have some thoughts about that questions are really good because that means we're moving through the transition process. Oh, Gail, I love your answer. Questions open doors and windows to the unknown. That's super fun. I like that a lot. And Jason said that questions show engagement. Yes, absolutely. So questions are really, really fantastic. And here's my question to all of you. Are you getting your desired results? Are you getting the outcomes that you intend? So in my breakout conversation, we are talking about how, unfortunately, there's this statistic about how a lot of times change fails. And I'm going to suggest, well, okay, whatever, whoever measures the numbers, I don't really know. But a lot of it comes from leaders not paying attention to the change impact and then helping people manage through that transition. And then to the point here, getting their desired results or outcomes. So in order to help that happen, getting our desired results, questions are a really key element. Questions are key because absolutely questions help clarify. Questions show that I care about you. So a couple of points in thinking about questions. Questions actually create change. And this is really mind-blowing if you pause and think about it. But I would suggest that any significant change that has occurred intentionally, right? I mean, there's things that happen in the environment around us, maybe we didn't choose, but any change that you've chosen started with a question. In fact, even some strategic changes or shifts, or even companies have come from questions being asked. And you're probably all familiar with the story about Netflix when Reed Hastings was like, why do I have to get into my car and drive this physical DVD back to a store? Why can't I just stream it? Right? That was the question. And the answer to that ended up being Netflix. For me, I used to live in Chicago. The pandemic happened. And I said to myself, why am I sitting here on the 49th floor, not allowed to go anywhere when I could be in a yard and being outside in sunshine? I'll move to Arizona. So my question ended up in a really big change. And probably for many of you, big questions can lead to change. So questions are fabulous because they create change. They also, again, to the comment here, they show that you care. So they can increase commitment and improve the outcome of any situation by asking questions. But here's a little tip. When you ask the question, make sure you pause and listen to the answer. Because I'm sure we've all had leaders who have done that, right? They're going to be really smart and really good, and they're going to ask you the question, and then they forget to listen. Questions can also help focus your thinking, and questions can increase success. So here's the summary of this very wordy slide. When you think about questions, questions will open your mind. Exactly what Gail said in her comments here, that they open the doors and the windows to the unknown. When you answer a question, it shuts down the mind. Questions open the mind. And so that is the beauty and the power of questions as they connect back to change. So again, I would suggest that when you're trying to create change, all growth, all change starts by asking great questions. Oops, that's a little bit light, but I want you to reflect for just a moment. Think about your own leadership. When it comes to questions, asking questions, do you ask or do you tell? So in your day-to-day, what do you think your ratio is? Is it like 60% you ask questions, 40% you tell people things? Or are you like 20% questions, 80% telling? So just curious as you reflect on that. What do you think your ratio might be? And it's very interesting when leaders reflect on this. For most people, we spend a lot of our lives telling people things and not a lot of time asking people things. So whatever your ratio is, whatever number that is for you, I'm going to encourage you to increase your ratio of asking over telling. But as we ask questions, here's a question for all of you. Look at the two lists. And I'd like you to type in the chat number 1 or number 2. Which set of questions are better? And for bonus points, you can type in why. But when you think about questions, would you rather hear the list of questions in the list number 1 or list number 2? So would you rather hear what's good or useful about this? Or would you rather hear, how did this get screwed up? So you can already see by the tone of my voice. Yes. Tommy says number 2 is blaming, faulting, and very negative in the orientation of the question. Absolutely. And I wanted to present this to you because absolutely, we can sometimes say, I'm asking questions, but I would challenge you to be very aware of the kind of questions you're asking. In fact, just the first word can make an incredible difference in how people receive the question. Yes, because number 2 puts people on the defensive and is not helpful. And Melody, I like that. Number 1 fosters conversation. That's great. So if you look in the list on number 2, many of them start with why. Like, why did you? Why is a really dangerous way to start a question when you're trying to elicit feedback, thinking, or change, which is, why can't you get it right versus what can we learn from this? Or can you tell me a little bit about your thinking process as you worked through this challenge? So I wanted to put that out there as you consider the questions that hopefully you're going to ask more of in the coming days and weeks and months. As you increase questions, be very thoughtful about the question that you're asking, because I said here, not all questions are created equal. So I mentioned earlier a tip that I had, which is when you ask a question, make sure that you always take time to listen. And unfortunately, I think this is very true of society today. We often don't listen to understand where the other person is coming from. We're simply waiting for our turn to talk. And if that's your approach to asking questions, that's not going to work very well. So again, back to as a leader in the organization, the strategy is being implemented. People have questions. Instead of having the right answer, yes, you want to point them in the right direction, but you can also listen to understand. Because in my experience, a lot of times people are asking questions and they need an opportunity to process their thinking, sort of like thinking out loud. So, your opportunity as a leader, when people feel like they're challenging a change, they may just trying to understand the change. They just don't understand it. So, they're asking questions to help think through it. So, this is your opportunity. Is number one, ask good questions. And when you ask good questions, make sure you take time to listen. I wanted to make an offer to you. I love questions. In fact, I love questions so much. I literally have an entire OneNote notebook full of questions. I probably have, I don't know, several thousand questions that I've collected because I think they're so important and I love asking fun questions. So, in order to get your collection started, I would be delighted to share with you 30 empowering questions if that would be useful to you to add to your repertoire of questions. So just email me and I'll send those to you. Also, as you're thinking about asking questions, here are what I call the 7 C's in the art of inquiry. So, again, improving your ability to ask great questions. I'm not going to get into each one of these. Cultivating the habit, having a mindset of curiosity, being conscious of your timing. So, I'll say one thing there is you need to be sure that the person you're asking the question of is ready to receive the question. That's what that means, being conscious of your timing, choosing your context wisely, carefully listening, clarifying with follow-up questions. And this last one is one we probably all can benefit from, and that is being okay in silence. Unfortunately, we often have a belief that if I'm quiet or if the conversation stops, it means that the person's not engaged, isn't interested, wasn't listening. And in fact, what I've found is that silence can give the person an opportunity to really process their thoughts. So, as you improve your question asking, I'm going to encourage you to get comfortable with silence. And as I put on here, I've got a bunch of free videos on those topics if you want to hear more on any of that. So, I want to draw your attention back to this little equation that we've been thinking about throughout today's discussion about how beliefs, underlying beliefs, drive our behavior, which leads to results. And I'm going to connect that back, a little story to connect back to what I just shared about the importance of listening. So there was an executive that I worked with who she talks a lot. In fact, the CEO in our coaching said, please help her learn to listen more. And it's one thing to say, okay, executive, you need to listen more. But I don't know if you realize this, me telling her that is not going to create change. So we started exploring, why is it that you feel the need to talk? And as we had a conversation in our coaching discussion, she was reflecting on the reality that growing up in her family, if there wasn't constant conversation going on, you weren't connecting. So she had a belief that was, if as long as somebody's talking, then we're connecting. If there's silence, it means that we're not connecting. And as a result, that belief caused her to then behave in such a way that she was always talking and she wasn't giving people space to think, to respond, and so on. And so as a result, while she felt she was creating connection because that was her belief, the actual result was that people were feeling they weren't being heard. They were frustrated because they, didn't have a chance to get a word in edgewise and felt like she just talked too much. And it was really interesting as we worked back this little formula here. It was like, oh, if I shift my belief and instead of believing that talking all the time means we're connecting, and replacing that with listening gives us a chance to connect, that will create a new outcome. So that's just a quick example of how important it is to pause and examine the underlying beliefs that are driving behaviors. So again, I want to challenge each of you to think about how you can replace some beliefs that you may have about needing to know everything, about why people come and ask you questions. And instead of maybe the false beliefs, you can adopt some new beliefs about the value and importance of asking questions. So we're going to have another quick breakout as we divide you up. Maybe we just have 2 to 3 people in a group. And we're going to do our best to mix you up with some different people so that you have a chance to meet some new people. As I mentioned, our objective is helping connect you across Cal CPA and put you in touch with people maybe you haven't spoken with before. And we're going to have a real quick conversation in your group of 2 to 3 people. We spoke today about the topic of change. We talked about this equation, right? The beliefs drive behavior, which leads to results. And we talked about questions, the importance of questions and using questions, of asking more questions versus telling people things. So this is going to be a really simple check-in with your colleague. Again, introduce yourself and then just quickly share the new insight or awareness you have in any of these areas. You don't have to do all 3. It's just, what's your biggest takeaway from the conversation that we had today? So we're going to have everybody break out into their rooms and we'll see you back. We're going to give you 4 minutes. So that's 1 minute of just check in who your names, and then a minute each to be able to share your insight or awareness. And then we'll bring you back to wrap up. Hey, everybody, welcome back. So as you're joining, I would love if you share, you can type it in chat, a new insight or awareness that you have from the session today, whether it was around change, whether it was around questions, whether it was around the formula I shared about beliefs that drive behavior that lead to success or to your outcome. So any good insights that you had from shared in your conversation together. Well, as you are typing in and sharing your insights and awareness, and hopefully you guys had great conversations with each other, just going to share some resources. And again, you'll get a copy of the slides so that you can access this. But I have some suggestions if you're intrigued about questions. Remember, I said I collect questions. I think they're so powerful and important. In fact, I used them in my Thanksgiving dinner. I had people who didn't have a place to go otherwise at Thanksgiving, and we sat around and answered really interesting questions. So these are some resources for you in terms of books on the topic of questions. And also, I have a set, I call them leadership question cards, which I love using with leaders. They're not necessarily conversation cards, they're really challenging questions for leaders. And of course, in the topic of change, I mentioned I've got a LinkedIn learning class on change. If that's useful and you have access to LinkedIn learning, check out Managing Organizational Change for Managers. So I just want to check back with some folks. We've got some responses as far as your takeaways and insights from this session. Love this. Become more aware of my percentage of asking questions versus just telling people. That's great. I fell victim to the U, so the uncertainty in FUD when implementing the new audit methodology at my previous firm. Yeah, and this is something we didn't have a chance to get into, but it's fascinating that some of the impacts of change, especially the FUD factor, the fear, uncertainty, and doubt, creates a brain threat that can actually prevent you from using your executive reasoning so that you're unable to think logically and clearly. And that's a whole other discussion, but very good, Kurt. Thanks for sharing that. We're all on different parts of the continuum as evolving leaders, which takes listening and expressing oneself. Beautiful. Another takeaway, how to be a better listener. Yes, and we could probably talk a whole session on that about listening and what does great listening look like and the importance of validation as you listen. And then Ashley said, is it possible that sometimes asking questions can be perceived as being negative when that's not the intent? Absolutely. Anything's possible. And here's a suggestion is you can preface the question asking and get permission first, right? So do you mind if I ask you this question? That's very helpful because somebody might say, no, I'm not in a place where you can ask me that question. And then Gail also mentioned that there were times when I've asked questions to find out somebody's concern, and the person's like, stop asking questions, just tell me the answer. That's a really interesting response. And yes, I feel culturally, there's a lot of organizations where people just want to be told what to do so that they don't have to take responsibility for the action, right? Like, I don't want to think of it myself because if you tell me what to do and I do it, then you're accountable, not me. So that can also play into it. And coaching, which is asking questions, is a really helpful way for growing, evolving, and developing people. But there may be times where people are resistant to it. And Natalie, great point. Tone is very important when asking a question, for sure. The tone is important. The words that you choose are important. All of it matters. So I also wanted to share with you, this is something we were talking about in the little group I was part of. I created a toolkit. If you guys are interested, it's completely free. It's the Change Leader Toolkit, because I mentioned to you about my passion for change management. There's lots of great change management resources out there, but I've not seen a lot for change leaders, which all of you are. And the value of this toolkit is helping you say, number one, what are all the changes going on? And how are they impacting the people? Number two, what does success look like for this particular change? And what are the key elements of it? And then what can I do every day to ensure change success? So I'm going to give you that opportunity. I want to say a quick thank you. And in our last couple of minutes, I would love for each of you to share a word that summarizes this session for you. So just a quick one word close. If we were together in person, would go around the circle and I'd have you do that. But since we're not, what was today for you? So hopefully some of you might feel inspired, enlightened, empowered, more curious, maybe
I think reminded, because
reminded.
I think these are definitely things that I've learned about in the past, but it's
Yes.
something that, change is something that happens to all of us on such a
Right.
consistent basis, like small to large
Mhm.
changes, and sometimes we get overwhelmed in the minutia that we make some of these common mistakes or pitfalls that we've been talking about.
Absolutely. Yes, isn't it so fabulous? There's so many times where we think that answers are going to be really complicated, but it's just common sense. So thank you for that. And Brad as well. It's a reminder we need to listen. This was insightful, refreshing. Listen. That's awesome. I recognize in today's world of one meeting after another, that you all have something else to get to. So I'm going to conclude to give you 5 minutes to make that transition to your next event, whatever that might be, and say a great big thank you from me to all of you. Remember to ask more questions, to recognize the change impact, and to always examine the underlying beliefs that are driving people's behaviors that are leading to results and outcomes. And if you're not sure about them, ask some questions. So thank you everyone for your participation. Thanks so much for being here. And for all of you who are watching after the fact, thank you for being here. Hope you all have a wonderful Wednesday and look forward to another time when we can be together and learn and ask each other some fun questions. Have a great day, everyone.